The Harvard Graduate School of Education, working at the nexus of practice, policy, and research.
Well, good evening, everyone. I always come to this event, and I don't think I've ever seen the Asquith Forum so full. And it's just wonderful to welcome a full group of you to this kickoff event for the 2010 Alumni of Color Conference. I also want to acknowledge the hard work of the co-chairs, Myosha and Sophia. So can we have another round of applause for them? They have worked hard. The theme of this year's conference is responsibility, using dissonance and delight for justice. And when I met with Sophia and Myosha, they said to me, we want you to reflect on this a little bit. And the first thing I did was just think about how great it is to turn this word that we all know into a compound noun. It should be. I think that we have the ability to respond in myriad ways to improve the lives of learners. Some of us here are practitioners, some of us are policymakers, some of us are researchers, some of us are advocates, and some of us are a combination of all of these things. This afternoon, some of you heard the Education Secretary say that education is the civil rights issue of our time. It is. And as somebody who's been in education for so long, it's so wonderful to see education front and center on the policy agenda. In fact, I think it's fair to say it's the #1 policy issue facing our country. You know, in our work, we don't always speak with one voice. And we saw that today, I think, in the questions that were posed to Secretary Duncan. Yet I think we can agree that dissonance is not division, and that criticism is caring. Dissonance is a way to address issues of inequality and justice. And can I just tell the students here that you are responsible for teaching me that criticism is caring. And it's a lesson I'm really glad that I've learned. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade. He is an assistant professor of Raza Studies and Education Administration and Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of California, San Francisco, where he is the co-director of the Educational Equity Initiative at San Francisco State University's Cesar Chavez Institute, a community-based research center linking research to practice in addressing social injustice. He's the author of numerous journal articles and book chapters on the conditions of urban education, urban teacher support and development, and effective pedagogy in urban settings. He recently co-authored The Art of Critical Pedagogy, Possibilities for Moving from Theory to Practice in Urban Schools. He's currently completing a second book on the core competencies of highly effective urban educators. As you all know, he has spent his career firmly rooted in practice. As a high school teacher who practices critical pedagogy in urban classrooms in East Oakland, Jeff, if I may, has had a lot to teach all of us about the elements of effective teaching in schools serving poor and working class children. I love the title of your talk, Note to Educators, Hope Required When Growing Roses in Concrete. Please join me in welcoming the 2010 Alumni of Color keynote speaker, Dr. Jeffrey Duncan Andrade.
Okay, greetings everyone. I went to the bathroom, I turned my mic off. I learned that lesson the hard way one time. Let me start first by recognizing the young people who inspire me to write the things that I write and say the things that I say. This is my most recent group of students that I'm working with. I teach in my community, so I'm a 9th grade English teacher in East Oakland. I live about a minute and a half from the school that I teach at. And this is, I usually start with a cohort of 30 students, and I'll loop with them for 4 years. I am a tenure track faculty member. That's the gig that pays the bills. But then in my free time, my hobby is teaching high school English to kids in my community. So this is my most recent group, and during Arnie Duncan's talk, it was really interesting because I kept getting all these texts about, because they have this big debate on Monday, and I'm missing the final prep for my section of the debate, and they're not happy. So I'm just letting y'all know that right now you're not welcome in East Oakland. So anyway, I always start off by sort of recognizing the young people that I think are the reason why we're sitting in these chairs today, and are really the reason that I'm so hopeful, despite a lot of the things that I'm seeing, not only in general policy, but kind of across our nation that could do quite a bit of damage to folks' hope. And yet, despite all those conditions and kids that are living in those conditions and have been for a while, they still show up to school every day. And they still show up to school looking for something bigger than themselves. And I hope that I can offer a little bit today to give folks some additional energy to continue to try and meet those expectations that our young people come with to us every day. Before I get into the talk, I just want to start by apologizing. And I'm going to apologize because I tried to bring the sun. And I got to check in at SFO, and they said that I needed to check that. And I didn't have time to go back, so I just left it, and they threw it in with all the other stuff, the tubes of toothpaste and whatnot. So, I take responsibility for the fact that you have rain and snow. We have a little technical issue here that suddenly my notes have decided they want to be part of the presentation. So I'm going to see if I can. Oh.
We have help coming.
Is that what it is? I'm going to try it again. Nope. I think they're... No? Y'all don't need to whisper. Uh-huh.
Is this a Mac? Okay, so go down to slideshow.
I'm getting the spinning wheel of death now.
Oh, you're getting that. Oh, it's Keynote?
Yeah. Oh, that might be it.
Okay, so
I'm just an audience member, but I've had a similar problem. And there's a function. You're using that.
Yeah.
If you there's something about mirroring.
Yeah.
And if you you tried to turn it off. Okay.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a full restart. Let's see if that works.
because I know that you want it in presenter so that you see your notes, but that.
No, I don't even want that.
Oh, you don't even want that?
No,
Okay,
I
so
don't,
then.
I don't know why it's doing it, because it...
So if you go into, next time you start up Keynote, just make sure that when you go into slideshow setup, take it out of presenter. Try that, see if it works.
Cool.
Okay?
Yep.
All right.
No worries. So I've lectured at Harvard 3 times. I've lectured at Harvard 3 times. The first time this is the third time. First time I lectured, this exact same. Damn Harvard. So to every classroom teacher in the room, right? Lesson number 1 for tonight. Anytime you use technology, be ready for it to go bad. Okay? So what you just saw was my 18 years of being in the classroom. It's like, it ain't no big thing. Okay? Talk amongst yourselves, we'll work it out. Okay, so the talk. So many of you know that this piece, or this talk tonight, comes from a piece that I wrote for the Harvard Ed Review. And so I want to acknowledge the editors that helped to push that piece through, because it's not oftentimes that you get to write a piece, particularly in such an esteemed academic journal as the Harvard Ed Review, and talk about Tupac. And so, you know, that it takes courage to break through some of those boundaries, especially inside of the academy, and so I appreciate that. And I also want to appreciate the folks that organized to have me be able to come out, particularly Myosha and Sophia, who gave me a wonderful chicken and French fry dinner last night with a great cold beer and some good conversation. So many of you have probably already accessed the talk or through the article. And some of what you'll hear today is very much connected to what I wrote, and some of it begins to build on that a little bit. So I think there's probably a set of questions that are already in people's minds, particularly about how I felt about what Arne Duncan had to say. So the first, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time responding to him because I feel like my response is embedded in my work and it's embedded in my talk. But I will answer the two probable questions that are most on folks' mind. The first is, thanks for the setup on that one, Keith. And of course, the asterisk is there because, you know, I mean, who knows, right? And then I'm sure, you know, folks are really wondering about what I think about Race to the Top and sort of all the details underneath that. And here it comes. Okay. So I'll start with Pac, who is really the person that has heavily influenced my life as a young man of color, but also as a teacher. And when I got ready to, at first I was kind of balking at doing the article because I wasn't really sure how I wanted to come at it and whether or not it could come at it in a way that I felt really captured the way I feel about what's going on in schools and what we need to do. And I got some really good peer pressure. And as I wrote the piece, I started trying to balance this Obama's use of hope, because it's really, you know, the issue was about trying to capture this moment in time that we're looking at with our first black president, and so for me, writing the piece was really about beginning to interrogate the ways in which the nation was enraptured with his use of this idea of hope. But then also trying to acknowledge the fact that in communities like mine in East Oakland, but communities like that around the country, where people are suffering. And I think it's important that we use that term. And you know, if you go to Jamaica, right, they refer to the people that are the most entrenched in poverty as the sufferers. And I think it's important that we name, right, the level of trauma that people are experiencing inside of our own cities and inside of our own communities. And so, but inside of that suffering, there has always been a legacy of hope. So what Obama was drawing on is something that people of color and poor people have been familiar with for a long, long time in this country. And yet the way that we often talk about hope in urban communities is different than the way that I think Obama was playing with the idea of hope. And so I wanted to kind of interrogate the ways in which this term can become a trope, right? Or what Cornel West refers to as hope on a tightrope. Okay? And the ways that hope can also be such a profoundly important factor to not only changing the ways in which our lives are headed, but in the case of education, changing the ways that young people feel about themselves inside of our classrooms. And then, of course, I wanted to operationalize Tupac's use of the idea of hope, which was really a piece that resonated throughout his work. And the reason that I pull on Pac is because when you think, if you study Pac as a scholar, right, rather than just dismissing him as whatever it is that MTV has made you think he is, if you study Pac as a scholar and you study his work as scholarship, right, then what you begin to see is that there's a very clear reason that Tupac is perhaps the most influential popular cultural icon in our time. And I'm talking globally. Okay? I've done a lot of work around the world, from New Zealand to Brazil to Mexico to Trinidad to Tobago. And when I go, young people always ask me, say, "Oh, you're from Oakland? Did you know Tupac?" And I'm like, "Look, dude, it's a big city. We don't know each other." Right? But it's incredible, right? Pac died. Anybody? What year Pac died? Okay. Do that math. Right? How many years has that been? Okay. Think about the lasting power of his work, that today you can walk into any urban school and those kids will know who Pac is. And they're still bumping Pac. They're more influenced by Pac than any textbook we've ever produced. Okay? Any lesson we've ever designed. Right? And so feel how you want about Tupac. I'm critical of him as well. I don't hold anybody up as this sort of perfect icon. But what I know for a fact is that from my youth to the youth I work with today, Pac has been incredibly influential. And as educators, it is our job to understand what are the things that are influencing our young people's worldview. Okay? To understand those in a profound way rather than continue to dismiss youth culture, right, as a phase. And to begin to understand what is it about Pac's message that is so profoundly impactful across race, across gender, across age, across political boundaries, across geographic boundaries. How has this man's message been able to resonate for so long, and what does it mean for us as educators to begin to be that compelling to our young people? Okay? Because I'm tired of losing the hearts and minds of our babies to Sony, to PlayStation, to Xbox, to MTV, right? But the reality is, until our message is as deeply compelling as their message, at least on the surface, appears to be to our young people, we don't have a shot in hell. Right? And I often think about myself as a young person who was not particularly engaged in school, and it's funny because I was a hooper too, and I heard Arnie talk about how, he came to school for hoop, and I was like, wow, man, that's just like me, and we kind of got the same last name, and but he's hella tall. Did you see how tall he was? I'm like, damn, if I had your height, I probably wouldn't be a professor. I'd still be in the league. Maybe not. So this talk is really, to use, to respect my methodologists in here, to triangulate, okay? 3 data sources, okay? Obama as data source, Pac as a data source, and then the legacy of struggle for freedom and justice that has occurred throughout communities that have endured suffering. Okay? And so I'll begin with Pac. And Pac talks about hope using this image of the rose that grows from concrete. And many of you may be familiar with the fact that he wrote a book of poetry that it has this title. It's a poem that he wrote, and then it's also a performance that he does inside of one of his tracks where he expands a little bit on the poem. And so I'll start there to share that song with you as a sort of setup for where we're headed tonight.
But to ask us why we turn from bad to worse is to ignore from which we came. Mama's just a little you see, you wouldn't ask why the rose that grew from the concrete had damaged petals. On the contrary, we would all celebrate its tenacity. We would all love its will to reach the sun. Well, we are the roses. We are the roses. This is the concrete. This is the concrete. And these are my damaged petals. These are my damaged. Don't ask me why. Don't ask why. Thank God. Thank God. Ask me how.
Okay, so for educators working with kids that are growing up in the concrete, right, the question for us should not be whether or not it's concrete. Right? The question and the challenge to us is, how do we recognize the incredible resiliency and will to reach the sun that is in those babies that come to school anyway? Okay? How do we tap that? Right? And Pac says, right, that don't focus on my damaged petals. Of course I have damaged petals. I'm growing in concrete. Right? And yet that becomes much of the meta-focus of the discourse about urban youth and the response mechanisms that get applied in urban schools. Okay? It's a hyper-focus on the dysfunction of our babies. And of course, we could narrate that easily. Okay? Because there are many activities that young people in urban communities, and I would add suburban and wealthy communities, engage in, which are highly dysfunctional. Okay? They're adolescents. It's a synonym. Adolescence dysfunction, okay? So of course, right, they're growing, but the difference is not in whether or not there's some dysfunction. The difference is in the response. That when wealthy kids are dysfunctional, with wealthy kids in Oakland, we talk about Ghost Ride the Whip, okay? Which is, some people are like it and some people are like, okay? So don't worry, if you don't know, Google it. And when kids from my community do that, they're pathologized, right? They're criminals. They're deficient, right? But when wealthy kids do that, right, it's just teen angst, right? And they're just, they're testing boundaries, and they get help. They get support. Our kids get locked up, right? And we all know this. The legal research is really clear on the different sentencing patterns for right? So I'm not even going to go there, right? But the point being that Pac's legacy is a challenge to us, right? Is to stop asking why young people are engaging in this way, okay? And to begin to see them for the resiliency that they offer us and the potential to move beyond those places that they are right now. Okay? And the reality is that for many young people, they are growing up in concrete, okay? Both metaphorical and literal. That young people living in urban communities face a litany of social injustices and challenges before they walk into our classroom. And I ran out of bullets. Okay, I had to have multiple slides to actually cover them. But there is an increasing body of research. And let me say that I don't read much in our field anymore. I'm beginning to read a lot more outside of our field in places like social epidemiology and medical sociology, to really try to understand the impact of these conditions on babies before they even come to us. And there's a great documentary film that just came out, which I think should be mandatory viewing for every teacher. And PBS produced it, and that's the name, Unnatural Causes. How many of y'all have seen this? Okay, so, wow, shocking. Right? This is some of the most, what social epidemiologists and the medical field are saying are some of the biggest breakthroughs they've had in the last 100 years. And teachers are not being given access to this stuff. PBS has a great website for teachers, has all kinds of activities for folks. It's like a 6 or 7 part documentary film. And the after colon of Unnatural Causes, I don't know if you can see that, but is the question that they began to investigate is inequality making us sick? Answer, yeah, okay, for sure, right? But it's having real medical impacts on people's bodies, okay? And so what more and more of these kinds of organizations are looking at is what they call the social indicators of health, okay? And this is the kind of lexicon that teachers need to have in their vocabulary, okay? What are the social indicators of health? And what is the relationship between all these things that our young people are experiencing? Not just on the streets, but also in schools, right? Because we've known for a long time that schools often act as a social mirror. Okay? What you experience in the broader society is oftentimes precisely what you experience in schools. And a good friend of mine who Harvard has done well with, a woman named Joan Cohn, who you've published a couple of her pieces as well, longtime English teacher in the Bay Area. She said to me once that, Jeff, schools must be better than society if society's ever going to improve. Okay? And what we know right now is that schools very much mirror society, and schools are oftentimes worse than what we see in the broader society. And of course, what these produce, what social epidemiologists are referring to as social toxins, what these produce are what Tupac referred to as the damaged petals. Okay? So this is a map of my city, right, that gets produced every year in the Oakland Tribune, front page. And it's a map of all of our homicides, the face, the name, the location of everybody who was murdered. And this doesn't count people like Oscar Grant. You all familiar with Oscar Grant out here? Okay, for those of you who are not, Oscar Grant was my butcher. And he cut meat at the Farmer Joe's, which is right down the street from my house, in the 30s. I live in 3400 block of East Oakland, as those of you who were here for the Arnie talk heard me say. And Oscar Grant was shot while on his knees in the head by a police officer on camera at the BART station, which is the subway station in my neighborhood. Now, the thing about Oscar Grant is he doesn't show up on this because he wasn't a homicide. He was a police-justified killing, which is currently in court. We'll see where that goes, but most folks of color in this room know how that's going to go. So, of this map, you can see, you probably can't see, make out the actual faces, but you can see. You know who we're talking about here. And I've been teaching in Oakland for 18 years. Not 1 year has passed where I've not buried at least one student. 2 of my students are on that map. Okay, so I'm not here to offer you some silver bullet, some panacea that is going to suddenly correct all of these problems overnight. I don't have that. If I did, trust me, I would not be standing here right now. Okay? But we have to recognize that there's a relationship between that bulleted list of things and the material conditions in which people are living. Okay? And of course, what that then results in is a form of social trauma which people are carrying in their bodies. So this is a mother from Oakland. And the Tribune ran another article that talked about how this has become a whole industry in Oakland. Okay, T-shirt making for Rest in Peace shirts. Right? So this is a mom wearing a Rest in Peace shirt for her daughter who was hit by a stray bullet in the head while she was sleeping about 6 blocks from my house. Okay, this is a young school-aged child standing outside of his apartment complex. And if you look at the floor, okay, or the ground, he walks across that every day before he comes to your class. He walks across that, R.I.P., for his brother. And he wears that hoodie, okay, for his brother. And he comes in, and what we have to offer him is a test score. There's something morally wrong with that. Am I against measuring progress on tests? No. But frankly, I don't give a shit about tests if we're not dealing with that. And neither does he. That if we can't get at that, who cares if the test score goes up? Frankly, who cares? Right? We are a morally bankrupt institution if we are more focused on a child's test scores than on healing the kind of trauma that young people are experiencing in their lives. Okay? And the funny part is that all the research suggests that if you want to raise test scores, what should you focus on? The trauma. Right? You heal the trauma, and guess what's a nice little ancillary benefit of that? Test scores go up. Kids are more able to engage. Right? That's from the park across the street from my house on the sandbox. That's a crime in my city. It's called vandalism. And if you work in schools, if you spend any amount of time in schools, you see that all the time. On kids' binders, on their lockers, on the walls, and we criminalize them for it. Do you know what that is according to the medical field? Trauma. It's a form of mourning and healing, which we punish kids for. I've heard people talk about the obsession with death that our kids have. What I think they're obsessed with is trying to heal from the death that they're seeing in their lives. And of course, it's not just kids, it's whole families will buy these RIP shirts in Oakland and cities like Oakland. So it's not just an Oakland phenomenon, of course. But it's all over. So this is a city park about a block and a half from my house called Nickel Park. And Edgar was a 17-year-old who was shot and killed in the middle of the street at 1 p.m. on the first day of summer. Okay? See the date right there. And he lay in the middle of the street in front of this park and bled to death. And there were 6 elementary school-aged children. And you can't see it, but behind, you see those little benches right there. Just to the right of that, you see that little yellow, whatever that is. That's a play structure. Okay, and it's kind of covered by the sign. But behind that sign, there's a play structure. And there were 6 elementary school-aged children playing on that structure that watched him get shot and die. and there were no services for them when they went back to school. So, Arnie talked about this gap that opens up, right? They leave school and they're at this level, and then they come back to school after 3 months, and they've regressed, right? But it's so much more complex than that, right? And so these kids come back to the elementary school, and there's no services for them, and yet this nation recognizes that you must deal with that. You must deal with young people who see that kind of violence. You must. Do you know how we know that the nation recognizes that? Columbine. Columbine still has grief counselors. Still, to this day. How long has it been? 10 years? It's been a while. Okay? So it's not so much that we don't even recognize it. It's that what we do think in this country is that the suffering of some people is more important than the suffering of others. That the suffering of poor bodies, economically impoverished bodies, the suffering of darker-skinned bodies matters less to us in this nation than the suffering of wealthy white children. Okay? And we need look no further than the institutional responses to the trauma. What Columbine did is exactly what you're supposed to do. And those counselors stay as long as they need to stay. 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, as long as you need it, we will give you the support you need. Okay? But our kids, these kids that were lamenting over their test scores, and these teachers that just can't handle them, our kids don't get that kind of service and support. And so you don't need to look very far if you're wondering why it is that there's achievement. And it was interesting that he talked about an opportunity gap, and he said that I call it an opportunity gap because there's a lot of scholars who have already referred to it as an opportunity gap. Okay? And I don't know, how the Academy feels about coining terms, but we should, investigate that. Who said it first? Whose term is it really? My wife's a lawyer, so I'm going to check into the intellectual property issue there. So what is the impact of this? Right? Well, what the research says is that this exposure to, this constant exposure to these forms of social toxins creates what is referred to in the medical field as an allostatic load. Okay? Which, again, this is the kind of language teachers should be conversant in. So this is a series of graphs that maps out the human body's response to stress. Okay? Now, stress in an ideal situation is a good thing. I know the students in this room do not agree with me right now, but trust me. Okay? I know you got a paper to write, and you're like, this ain't good. Okay? It's good for you. But only under the proper conditions is stress good for you, because what happens when you experience stress under normal conditions is this, okay? That once stress is inserted into your life, you have this peak, right? And your body begins to increase production of things like cortisol, adrenaline, right? And a number of other chemicals that are going on in your body that allow you to raise your level of performance. Okay? And that's a good thing. And it also increases a number of chemicals that improve your memory. Okay? So during that stress moment, right, you're retaining a lot of your body's response to handle that stress. Okay? And then, if you'll notice, after the stress moment begins to back down, you see this nice, smooth slope, what they refer to as recovery, which is really important, that your body has that recovery period to begin to internalize all those lessons that you learned in that grad class that you never really understood why you were there, and then you wrote the paper and you got an A, and you're like, I love that class. So that's what your body was going through, right, in those moments. Now, one of your scholars here, a brother named David Williams, talks about, and he's prominently featured in the Unnatural Causes series, and he says that everybody experiences stress, right? So stress not a bad thing. But it is the multiple accumulation of multiple negative stressors without the resources to cope that is problematic. I'll say that again. It is the multiple accumulation of negative stressors without the resources to cope that causes real health issues. And that's what you see here in these four. I'm going to focus on these two. The first of these is when you're constantly, right, being exposed to new stressors. And I'm not talking about like over a period of a week. I'm talking about in a period of minutes or hours in your day. And what do you notice about both the response slope and the recovery slope? They're much steeper, right? That kind of recovery is not good for your body. That kind of stress response is not good for your body. And I joke with teachers all the time. It's like, that's first period, second period, third period, fourth period. Right? Like, it just never stops, right? So that's one thing, and this is when you have these repeated hits. Okay? So you might think about this as young person on my block sees Edgar get shot. Sun goes down, school, are they carrying that stress with them to school the next day? Yes. Okay, they're carrying it in their bodies in all these chemicals, okay, that you don't see, but they're working inside of their body. Okay? And then they bring that stress into your class, and so what can't they do? What is nearly physically impossible for them to do in that moment? Right. Sit down and be cool. Right? Because they're hurting. And the deep part about it is that there's a set of chemicals that are firing off in their body that they don't even necessarily have very much control over. That's affecting their physical ability, okay, to deal with this stressor that they're. And then what is our typical response? Not of course not the Harvard teachers, but you know, those other teachers. What is their typical response? When Willie starts tweaking out. When Willie flips his desk over, it's like, fuck this. Let's be real. Does that happen in classrooms? Okay. So what at that moment do we do? A lot of teachers. Punch them out. Right? You're out of here. We exclude them. Right? Now think about it in this context, in a medical context. What have you just done? You've inserted another stressor in their life. Okay? I'm not judging it. I've been there with Willie. Right? I'll send Willie's ass out. Okay? But as I began to understand this research, I was like, damn, I just took him from here, right, back up to here. And he might not even have got that in my class. What Willie might actually be experiencing is this, right? A prolonged series of stressors where he's getting no recovery time. So he comes, maybe Willie hasn't eaten because there's just too much drama going on at the house because Cuzzo got popped, so Willie doesn't get to eat. Willie's stressed. Willie comes to my class, flips out. Why? Because he's stressed. What do? Add to his stress. So I punch him out, and he goes to the principal. And the principal's been seeing Willie, hasn't she? Yeah, because Willie's a regular. Okay? Willie doesn't even need to clear the secretary anymore. He just gets in there, and the secretary's like, right? Willie goes right in the principal. Principal response is what? Often. Right, suspension, or a firm talking to, or never really asking Willie what's going on, or even when they do ask Willie what's going on, Willie's not ready to talk because Willie doesn't really trust that person to really start talking about the fact that he's getting abused, or he just saw somebody get smoked and their head blown off, and right? I mean, this is the reality of what a lot of our kids are dealing with. Right? And so instead of actually being an institution committed to healing and hope, we become an institution that is contributing to the social stressors in our kids' lives. If you want to understand this dropout rate, which, by the way, is not 27%, okay? My sister dropped out. Right? And I promise you, That she did not, in parts of California, to be categorized as a dropout, you actually have to go to the registrar and report you're dropping out. These people don't know dropouts like I know dropouts. I promise you, my sister did not go to the registrar and be like, I will not be attending anymore. Please confirm that with your book. Okay? I'm leaving. That didn't happen. I know my sister. Okay? So we know that that number is probably much higher. The 27 is probably our most conservative estimate on dropouts. Right? So if you want to understand why that's happening so much, we got to understand the mismatch right now between what's going on in kids' lives, the real material conditions of kids' lives, how it's affecting their bodies, how that then affects how they respond in our classrooms, and then how we respond as the adults in their life that they're looking for something different from that we have not yet been able to deliver. Is this asking too much of schools? Yes. Yes. I'm just trying to narrate what it is that we're really dealing with. I just want to be as honest as we can about the challenges that we're facing here. Okay? Because until we can do that, we cannot possibly craft solutions that address the problem. The problem is not achievement. The problem is not engagement. The lack of achievement, the lack of engagement are symptoms. And until we can truly figure out what's going on with our babies, we don't have a shot to correct the symptoms. And that's why we keep playing these games and spinning around and not making a lot of progress. Now, of course, what's interesting is that other fields have been talking about this for a while. Because other fields are ready to confront the problem. Like racism. Problem. Okay? Problem. So Arlene Geronimus at the University of Michigan, who, by the way, after doing this research, was dragged through the mud for years, despite the incredible quality of her research. Now she's like some presidential professor at the University of Michigan, but we all know, right, the trajectory to get there isn't always a clean path. She talked about racism being an increaser of allostatic load and resulting in a process that she calls weathering. And of course, what the weathering process is, it's like if you have a brand new house, and I'll use Boston's weather as an example of something that might cause weathering. Right? Any brand new house, right? And then you get these, what's going on with the wind that blows rain and snow sideways? I'm walking down the street last night like this. Okay, that caused some weathering, right, on my jeans. My jeans were weathered from like knees down last night. And what happens is that over time, those jeans are going to start to fray. Right? It's not instantaneous. And that's an important thing to recognize, that this process of the allostatic load affecting our body affects us over time. It's not like, oh my God, right? I'm weathered. Right? And it's a slow accumulation. And this is how we explain black men having a declining life expectancy. Right? That it's the process of weathering, the accumulation of multiple negative stressors, which includes racism but is not exclusive to racism, that begins to actually have real health consequences for people in our communities and in our society. And of course, there's plenty of research, right, to support this. Now, y'all are laughing because, and some of you are like, what does that mean? Yeah, it's a spelling error. Right? Doesn't he have his PhD? Didn't they say he was a doctor? It's funny because, you know, my mom is like, son, I tell my mom, I'm going to go back to Harvard and give another talk, and she's just amazed. I mean, where I come from, it's like, are you for real? Like, dude, you're going to be at Harvard? Like, you know, do they drive you around and, like, you know, they helicopter you from the, it's Harvard, right? I'm like, Mom, it's just a place, Mom. She's like, can I come? No, Mom, you're not ready yet. You're not ready for Harvard, Mom. But she's like, son, you can't curse so much in your talks anymore, son. And I was like, okay, Mom. See, my mom doesn't text. Well, she's email. Never should have put her on the email. I get all these emails now, but she doesn't text. So this is, for those of you that don't know, WTF, right? I mean, we're screwed. Are you kidding me? This multiple accumulation of negative stress. We don't have a shot to help kids. Wrong. Wrong. What the medical research also shows is that there is one thing in the concrete that has shown some real medical promise. Anybody know? Hope. Hope. The medical field is actually starting to investigate hope as an actual response tool to these conditions. Right? Now that's slippery when you start talking about, like, Bayer getting a hold of it. It's a pill for hope. Take a couple, you'll be all right. But I think it's important that they're recognizing, right, how important what we do in the heart and mind is to the health of the body, right? And of course, to the ability of young people to focus and perform in school. Right? Now, this top thing, I put this up there because, and I shit you not, I did this talk long before I saw this. Oh, sorry, I just did it again. I don't know any other way to say that. It's such a cool phrase, right? But this is at my high school where I teach. Yeah, I was tripping out because I came in one day, right? And I had already done this talk a bunch of times, and so this slide already existed. And I walked in, I was like, no way. That some kid had, maybe a kid who saw my talk, right? Crawled up, and this is on the roof, the highest roof of the building, and hit that. So I had one of my students take a picture of it and add it to my slide because it's so cool. In dominoes. Anybody here play dominoes? Play bone? Okay, so yeah, it's interesting who just raised their hand. So in dominoes, right, there's a saying, all money ain't good money, right? So sometimes you'll lay down a domino and you'll get 5 points and somebody come right behind you off that and get 25, and then you get slapped and somebody tells you, come on, man, you got to sit, right? Well, all hope ain't good hope. Right? I feel like that at some level, Obama's use of the word hope made hope into a trope. Right? And so I want to kind of wrestle these ideas apart a little bit and look at the difference between what I call false hope, which is what I often see peddled to young people, particularly young people in urban schools, and what I call critical hope, which is, I think, what more and more folks are beginning to see as having a lot of potential for getting the kind of outcomes that we want in schools. Okay? And this is a paradigm that Cornel West plays around with by separating this idea of hope and optimism. Okay, have y'all heard him talk about that before? Didn't he used to work here? Okay. Where'd he go? Princeton? Lost into Princeton? Woo! You're losing. So hope, right? Hope, or we'll start with optimism. Optimism, right, according to West, is when you evaluate the existing conditions, and based on that evaluation, you believe things will get better. Right? Cornel West says, as a black man in America, I haven't had an optimistic day in my life. Right? But hope and optimism are not the same thing. Hope is when you evaluate the existing conditions, and then based on that evaluation, you believe things will get better anyway. Okay? So I'm not talking about optimism, because when you look at the existing conditions, when you do a real evaluation of the data, it's deeply troubling. I mean, we're in a hole, it's deep, and it's dark, and it's not a lot of light shining down right now. Right? And our kids are in that hole with us. So I'm not particularly optimistic, but I am hopeful, because I come from a long tradition of communities that have hope in the face of an evaluation that suggests things aren't going to get better anytime soon. But to avoid those forms of false hope, okay, that I don't think will lead us out of that hole, I think it's important that we interrogate the ways in which hope is often sold to young people living in these conditions. So, for example, we have the first type of false hope, which I call hokey hope. This is what Martin Luther King referred to as the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Right? Well, it will take time. How much time do we need as a nation to begin to realize that when a black kid or a Latino kid or a Southeast Asian kid or a poor white kid in East Oakland watches somebody get shot in the street, that they need a form of healing that is equivalent to, if not greater than, the form of healing we offer to young people in Colorado when they see that. How much time do we need to figure that out? Hokey Hope is an individualistic, up by your bootstraps kind of hyperbole that we sell to kids. What Angela Valenzuela has called in her book, Subtractive Schooling, should be mandatory reading for anybody working with youth of color, which she calls aesthetic care, right? The aesthetic of care. And schools have become very good at this. One of my friends calls it putting lipstick on a pig. Okay? Still a pig, right? So we can say that we care about kids, but can we deliver a much bigger challenge than moving it off the mission statement into classrooms? And what this Hokey Hope does eventually is it delegitimizes the pain that urban youth experience by experiencing these various forms of trauma. Okay? And the reason for that is because Hokey Hope is rooted in the optimism of the spectator who doesn't need to suffer. Somebody who comes from outside of the suffering comes in and lays the healing hand on, and then when the sun starts going down, is going to be right back out of there. Okay? A fundamental incomprehension of the suffering that young people are experiencing. Okay? And perhaps a fundamental unwillingness to actually understand that suffering. Am I saying that every good teacher needs to watch somebody get shot? No. No. What I'm saying is that we have to be committed as people that are working with young people who are experiencing that, to trying to comprehend the level of suffering that our young people are experiencing before they come into our classroom. The second kind of false hope that I see is what I call mythical hope. Okay? And this is what I believe Obama's election gives us around this so-called post-racial society, right? Or whatever the term is that we're going to try to use. And this is what West calls hope on a tightrope. Right? It's a slippery slope we're on right now to start talking about a national racial politics based on one man's ascendancy to the presidency. Right? Come talk to the black and brown people on my block about the racial politics of a black president. Okay? And they won't be talking to you about that. Okay? They'll be talking to you about jobs, schools, violence, suffering. Okay? So I'm not ready to go there yet. But interestingly enough, as soon as Obama gets elected, the whole nation in the public discourse begins to move this idea, starting with him. Okay? And this is taken directly from, be careful, y'all, about the internet. Because they just, catch you mid-sentence, and it's like, that, did I make that face? This is taken directly from McCain's concession speech, as printed in the New York Times. He writes, as a reference, okay, to the first black man being invited to the White House, Booker T, for dinner. Right? As a reference to that, he says, America today is a world away from the cruel and prideful bigotry of that time. There is no better evidence of this than the election of an African American to the presidency of the United States. Let there be no reason now for any American to fail to cherish their citizenship in this, the greatest nation on earth. Myth-making. Okay? Myth-making. Right? This is not the racial experience for the majority of people of color in the United States, certainly not for Oscar Grant, who gets shot in the head on his knees by a police officer in 2010. This mythical hope that gets peddled by using individual success stories, such as Obama, is ahistorical and it's depoliticized. And it denies the ongoing suffering of so many poor and working class people in this country. And the reason it's able to do that is because it tells a narrative that depends largely on luck and the law of averages to produce individual exceptions to a broader tyranny of injustice that most folks are having to deal with. And the third form of false hope is what I call hope deferred. Okay? And this I see a lot, particularly in the Bay Area, so-called progressive community. Right? Because hope deferred is based on a progressive politics of despair. You see, these folks are smart enough not to blame the victim. So they don't turn to kids or poor and working class folks and say, well, it's their fault. Instead, they blame the system. Okay? And the problem with this is, of course, that their critique never actually results in a transformative project for the kids. They're so damn busy critiquing the superintendent and the principal and Arnie Duncan and the tests and all these other things that they never do their damn job. They never actually teach, but they're critical as hell. Okay? And they know it's not the kids' fault. Okay? And this is hope for change in its most deferred forms. They imagine some distant, reformed, utopian, perfect society. Right? And well, once we get there, right, we won't have to worry about these things anymore. Or they put their stock in individual student success stories and their future ascent to the middle class. No real narrative about how to use hope as a way to not get kids off the block, but to get kids off the block to come back to the block. What Sandra Cisneros talks about in A House on Mango Street, where her key protagonist, anybody remember her name? Any lit majors in here? Esperanza, which means hope. Lost on a lot of people. That's a cute name, Esperanza. Right? Hope. Right? And Esperanza says, right, sometimes you have to leave to come back. Right? And that's where she found her hope. Not in the leaving to come back. Right? This one gets an extra slide. And the reason why is because I feel like hope deferred is so toxic, because it's so individualistic in nature. And it often puts the sacrifice, the requirement for sacrifice, in the student's lap. Do I think students need to sacrifice? Yes. But I don't think students are willing to sacrifice anything that we're not willing to sacrifice first. They're looking to us. What is the level of sacrifice we will put in? And only then are they going to be willing to consistently match that, okay, as a group, as a collective. And of course, hope deferred ignores this gap that I've been narrating between the students' most pressing needs and the education we actually offer them. Until the Secretary of Education is able to connect achievement with the most pressing needs in young people's lives, until the state and national standards are equipping kids to deal with murder, racism, poverty, inequality, until we're doing that as a national standard, the kids who experience those things will consistently do worse than the kids who don't. Why isn't that a national standard? Why isn't core national standard across grade level? And he's like, well, you know, you can't teach that in science. Bullshit. Are you telling me that the Tuskegee experiment wasn't scientific? Hey? Why can't we teach that in science class? Are you telling me the mathematics that led to the atom bomb is not scientific? Why can't we teach about that as a state and national standard if we're a community committed to justice and freedom for all? Because we're not yet. Right? And of course, we've known this in the research. All the way back to Maslow. Sorry you can't see the cite. There's the citation. Okay? Makes it official. Okay? Of course, we've known, right? And Maslow's stuff isn't even considered controversial anymore. The hierarchy of needs is widely accepted across fields. And yet, in most teacher ed programs, they never even learn about the hierarchy of needs. And the truth about Maslow's work, which has continued to be reinforced for almost 60 years now by fields outside of education, is that this line right here is an important indicator that if these things below this line are not being met, these needs, then it is virtually impossible for you in any concentrated long-term way to deal with those. You got to build up. This is the base of your hierarchy of needs as a human being. It doesn't have to do with race, class. If you took the wealthiest kids in this country and you stuck them in high poverty, and you stuck them in high violence, and you stuck them in substandard schools, you would see the same outcomes, and we all know that. So it's not about them being black kids, brown kids, right? It's about these basic human needs not being met. I'll promise you this. I'll stake my career on this. It's on camera, right? Okay, keep this part. I promise you, until we deal with this, we'll never close the gap. Don't have a shot. And what you find when you work with young people, and particularly the young people like the ones I work with in East Oakland, is that there's moments in time where these start to stabilize. And they start to slide up this, right, scale. They start to do a little better in school. How many of you have experienced this with students before? They start to get some traction, and then what happens? They get evicted. Right? They see somebody get shot. Right? Or family loses the job. Right? Can't eat. And suddenly they're doing worse in school. Suddenly they don't care anymore. Same kid. Right? If you got a kid that's nutting up in your class, I promise you, one of those four is under attack. And if you want that kid to get his or her head right, you got to figure out which of those four is under attack, and you got to deal with it. And trust me, it's way cheaper on your life expectancy as a teacher to just give the damn kid your sandwich, okay, than to keep, right, this thing going on that you know doesn't even make you feel right when you put that kid out. And this unwillingness and or inability to close this gap between what kids need and what we offer them in our classroom, that's hope deferred. That's hope deferred. And that is why hope was the last thing to come out of Pandora's box. Because it's the most dangerous. Particularly when you start to taste it and you have it yanked away. Or when you start to taste it and you realize that it's a deferred promise and there's no clear delivery date. And of course, as King said, with justice, hope too long deferred is hope denied. And that's where we start losing kids. They leave our schools when they can't hope anymore. What we talk about in our work is this move from coping to hoping. Because I think coping is important because we are not going to end racism, we're not going to end violence, we're not going to end poverty today. We're not. So we've got to help kids cope with the conditions in their lives until we can move them to a place where they have hope. Now let me talk about the difference between that. The way we talk about it in our work is coping is when you're on the ground and somebody has their boot on your neck. And that's what a lot of our kids are experiencing. Okay? And in that moment, what we have to help kids do is to build up the strength in their neck. Because the boot is not going to disappear today. Okay? That's the myth making. Okay? You got to deal with the reality that young people are experiencing. You got to help them cope. But if you stay coping for the rest of your life, all you'll get is a calloused neck. Right? You'll never get up. And you'll eventually lose the ability to cope because you'll see no possibility to hope. But hoping is training for young people to eventually see in themselves the capacity to stand up and take the boot off their neck. And at that moment, you can hope. And that's how the medical field defines hope. Hope is not the ability to produce some certain result. Hope is the belief that you can. Okay? Hope is the understanding that you have human agency, that you can respond no matter what the conditions are in your life. Right? That's hope. Now, I don't know a teacher in America that has ever been evaluated on their ability to raise hope. And yet, if we look across disciplines, what the research suggests is that the ability to raise hope is indeed perhaps the most profound precondition to being able to do all these other things we want kids to be able to do. So we got to figure out in our field, how do we begin to talk about this idea of moving from coping to hoping, of healing the trauma that kids are experiencing as a way to begin to evaluate or professionalize what it is that teachers do? And if you talk to any teacher who kids say, that's a great teacher, I promise you that they're a healer. And I promise you that they build fundamental sense of hope in their kids. We just don't do a good job right now of understanding it or measuring it. And the way I think they do this is by addressing what I call critical hope, okay, which is the enemy of hopelessness. Now, unlike the false hopes that I talked about, I think can operate independently of one another. I think if you're going to raise the level of critical hope in the young people that you work with, that you have got to be able to do all three of these. Okay, they're intertwined. I separated them out for the point of our discussion today, but I want to make that point clear, that I think you've got to be able to do all three. So the first is what I call material hope. And the first thing that every teacher needs to understand is that they are a material resource. If you are teaching in a community that lacks economic resources, good teaching, and on this point I agree with Arnie Duncan, that good teaching is one of the most important, fundamentally important material resources that can be given to communities that are suffering. But that needs to be, teachers that are able to meet this challenge need to be able to bust this binary. Okay, I feel like there's been this false binary that's been narrated that forces teachers to think they must choose between a rigorous academic pedagogy and a social justice pedagogy. That's a false binary. You are not academically rigorous if you are not leading kids to the path of freedom. Okay? And you are not socially just if you are not giving kids an academically rigorous curriculum. Okay? So it's a false binary. Okay? But we haven't done a good job as a field of show and prove. Okay, so what we've got right now is we've got a lot of cool little anecdotes, like the school in Philadelphia that he talked about. Right? What an empty narration. Right? It's like, well, did you kick all the low-performing kids out and that's how you got here? Because they could do that. No. Would anybody do that? Okay. So it's like, you know, under what condition? It's so much more important for us to narrate, if indeed that happened with the exact same group of kids, it's so much more important for us to narrate at depth how they did that. What did that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? We've got to get away from these Hollywood-esque narratives about good urban teaching, right? And tell the damn truth about how hard it is and really begin to dive down in our research to understand in fundamental ways what it looks like on a day-to-day basis. That's what will help our teachers. Okay? And that's the kind of transformative pedagogical project that we don't see enough. Okay? But it's not just enough to be a good teacher. You also got to come out of pocket. Okay? You got to come out of pocket. I mean, trust me. 18 years in the game, right? Don't even talk to me about salary. Okay? I'm already knowing. Right? But my context might be different than some people. You see, where I came from, I'm close to a damn millionaire. Making $34,000 a year? Are you kidding me? That's loot. My parents raised 7 kids on half that. Okay? So, what am I complaining about? Right? But what kids look at is their evaluation of us as a material resource is, you know I'm hungry. You know it. Okay? Let me finish, y'all laughing too soon. You know I'm hungry. Kid thinking this about me. You know I'm hungry. I see your sandwich. I'm going to see what's up. I'm not even going to ask you. I'm going to wait. Right? And if you don't say anything, if you don't offer that, if you don't think, if it doesn't register for you, that's saying something to me about where I am in your priority list. Okay? So, great teachers sometimes have to go hungry. Great teachers sometimes have to skip that movie because that kid needs bus fare. Because if that kid has to walk home, he might get shot. So you give him the bus fare. And then you pull up ineedpopcorn.com. Free movies, y'all. Check it out. It's got all the new ones, too. I mean, I would never use something like that, but I'm just saying for teachers. It might mean, right, that you give a kid a ride all the time because you know he or she is coming across gang lines. Or you know that a young sister is getting harassed every day on the way home. Right? So you drive them home. Okay? And as expensive as gas is right now, right, I'd rather give them my sandwich. Probably be cheaper. You might have to give up your I mean, so many of these things, right, I've seen great teachers do. I've seen great teachers give a bed to a child who was homeless. You sleep in my bed. I'll sleep on the couch. Okay? That kind of moral authority, when you're willing to make that level of sacrifice, what can you then demand from that kid in your classroom? Are you insane? You didn't do your homework? No more sandwich for you. Right? Next time, do your homework. The second kind of critical hope that I see borrows again from West. You can tell like how hurt I am that he left Harvard because I really like Cornel West because he has great verbiage. So he talks about a Socratic hope, right? And he makes this comparison between, of course, Socrates, right? And Socrates talked about the fact that the unexamined life is unworth living. Right? And then West extends that to Malcolm X, who added many years later that the examined life is painful. And so part of Socratic hope means being willing to confront the pain and confront the suffering, even when it's inconvenient for us, even when there's a cost for us, to be willing to go there first and then with our kids. And this is what I've referred to in my work in studying highly effective. What was the term he replaced it with? No, he used highly effective. Right? Earlier I asked Arnie Duncan about highly qualified teachers, and he's like, I would use the word highly effective. I was like, I would too. So in my work studying highly effective urban teachers, what I saw in them is they had this Socratic sensibility, this willingness to investigate their own practice, to look at their inability to reach a child as some of their own failing, rather than just externalizing it onto the kid. And that examination, that life examination is painful. When you realize you failed a child, it hurts. Right? It's so much easier to just say, well, if that kid would just, right? That's not as painful. Cornel West also says that, he might as well just come give this talk. Because he says that young people, right, would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon. And I feel like so many teachers have become good at delivering the sermon, but they don't necessarily live that sermon. And so kids are listening to them talk about all these things that they're supposed to do, and they're thinking to themselves, but that's not how you live your life. You don't stay here till 7. You don't even get here on time. Shit, you come late to my class. Right? What do you mean I can't? You do it all the time. Right? The devil speaks, but I'm a teacher. Right? Well, you are, that's right. And that is definitely your right because you're the teacher. But kids see those double standards. Okay? They see it not just in the little things, but in the bigger things in the way we live our lives. Okay? And so the real question we have to face as teachers is this one. Do we make the sacrifices in our own lives that we're asking kids to make? And if not, then we don't have the right to ask kids to make those sacrifices. We've got to lead the way. Okay? And my mom always told me, son, you lead by doing. You show by doing, not by telling. And this is what Pedro Noguera, wasn't he here for a while? Man, what's going on? This is the move from, am I ruffling feathers right now? Because I just have to go back to Oakland, so I'm going to be all right. Some of y'all got to stay, so watch out. You're laughing, you're on camera. Surveillance state. Pedro Noguera talks about moving from empathy to solidarity, right? And of course, that when you are empathetic to the suffering that's going on, then you have a certain understanding about it and a certain set of feelings about it. But when you are in solidarity with people who are suffering, in other words, as long as you are suffering, I am suffering. As long as you are hungry, I am hungry. That when you take that position as an educator, then you have the moral authority to make demands from kids, and they will follow suit. Because they understand that you are willing to engage in the very same, and of course you're not going to experience it in the same way they do because they're 16 or they're 15 or they're 8 or whatever, right? But if they believe you to be in solidarity with them and their families and the community in the struggle over the suffering, if you are willing to make a set of sacrifices that you frankly don't have to make because of your middle-class privilege, then young people are a lot more likely to engage in that. No teacher in the United States, in our public schools, has ever been evaluated on that criteria. Okay? Do you remember that evaluation about how much did you sacrifice to help your students? No. Okay? I actually got written up one time as a high school teacher. Don't laugh. I haven't told you what I got written up yet for too much chalk in my chalk tray. Written mandate. Now, of course, it wasn't really about that, was it? Right? It was about a set of other things. But the point being that I can get evaluated on that. But I've never been evaluated, right, on the level of sacrifice I was willing to make for kids. And of course, this is the difference. This is a fundamental difference that I think all teachers must understand. Too many teachers, that particularly those that come from outside of our communities, but sometimes those that are from our communities, are so concerned with whether or not they will be liked. They're so concerned with being called a racist or a classist or a whatever, right, that they are never loved. You see, when I think about this gap, right, I think about my mom. Because when I was a teenager, my mom used to make me do things all the time that I didn't feel like I should have to do. Like clean my room or take a shower. And my mom would always say to me, boy, I don't care if you like me because I love you. And you stink, so go take a shower. And I didn't get that at the time because I was an adolescent. Right? So I would hem and I would haw, and I said, Mom, you're so oppressive. Right? Be careful what you teach kids in your class because they'll start using the, right? You're a sub-oppressor. What? But to be loved means to be unpopular at times. To be loved means to do what's right in that moment for that child, even if in that moment that child doesn't believe that you love them, that's okay. Because what great teachers tell kids is, that's all right because I'm going to be in your life forever. Right? And then the kids are like, oh, God. Right? And it's this line, right, that you got to get over. The fact that sometimes kids aren't going to like you. But they know if you love them. They know what's really behind it. Okay? And perhaps nobody has taught me better than that. Nobody's taught me that better than my mom. Right? But Antonia talks about it in her work too, if you need a reference. And Socratic hope is, of course, about being willing to be a risk taker. Because as Socrates said, and as y'all know, he never wrote a word. Plato just followed him around. Scribe. I need one. I say some great things sometimes. I'm like, damn, I should have wrote that down. Plato. All great undertakings are risky. Okay? And the great teachers that I've been around have always been risk takers. Right? They're willing, right, to go all the way to the edge and figure out how much can I push this envelope to really transform my classroom and my kids' lives. And that's what it means to be Socratic, is to take those kind of risks that are going to come with some pain. And the third, pulling back from, not from Obama's use of the term, but of course, as most folks know, right, this idea of audacious hope, which he then becomes really well known for because of his book, was borrowed. Anybody know who he borrowed it from? That's right. Okay. Jeremiah Wright wrote a piece called The Audacity of Hope. It was a sermon he delivered. Okay. A man that Obama quickly distances himself from. Right? And no matter how you feel about that, I think it's important to recognize that this is not a term that Obama put forth. This is a term that Obama borrowed from somebody who was putting it forth in his community. And he saw the value of that. That you have to be audacious to hope in this climate. And in order to hope audaciously, you must be able to meet Carl Jung's challenge, to understand this idea of legitimate suffering. Okay, and Jung talks about that part of the condition of being a human being is to have to deal with suffering. Now, what we have in this nation state is a group of people who have massed enough resources to begin to exclude themselves from the forms of legitimate suffering that they should have to endure as a human being. Now, the problem with suffering is that it's a zero-sum game. And so what you have as people exclude themselves or excuse themselves from the forms of legitimate suffering that we all must experience as human beings, somebody else carries that brick. So what you have in our communities is something that Jung didn't necessarily account for, which is illegitimate suffering. You have large groups of young people who are being asked to carry a load that young people simply should not have to carry. And they're being asked to carry that load not because we don't know how to solve it, not because we don't know how to do it, but because we lack the courage to step up to the plate and actually handle it. And so one group of people, for much of their lives, get to loop out of a kind of suffering. And some other group of people, and we all know who they are, has to carry that extra burden precisely because that one group of people has decided that they don't want to have to deal with it. And this is precisely what Lisa Delpit finds in her work. Y'all published her too. Right? This jumped off in the Harvard Ed review, right? You know, I'm dating some people here now. They're like, what is he talking about? Right? So this book that so many of us read, right, was first an article in the Harvard Ed Review. And her distinction between some teachers that see kids who are suffering as other people's children, and if it's other people's children, that may not be a burden you want to take on. But what if it's your kid? What if that is your son or your daughter? Then what are the lengths to which you would go? How much suffering would you endure so that your son or daughter did not have to suffer? That is the difference between empathy and solidarity. Whether you can see yourself in those babies that you work with, or whether you simply see somebody else's child. What an impossible challenge. 30 kids. If you teach secondary, you might have as many as 160 or 170, depending on your union contract. It's an impossible challenge to meet. And that's why it's audacious. You have to be so audacious to walk in front of a group of kids and treat them, all of them, as though they're your flesh and blood. That's the challenge. Now, the way I think about this is treating my classroom as a micro-ecosystem. And it's interesting how many folks like Carol Lee and Gloria Ladson-Billings and some of these scholars are really beginning to start to play around with this idea more and more, that the classroom as a micro-ecosystem, because when you start talking about micro-ecosystems, you have to start bringing in this kind of multidisciplinary discussion about what you're doing in your class and how it affects people. And when you think about the classroom as a micro ecosystem, I'll give you a few examples of what this looks like. First of all, I think it requires a pedagogy that confronts and radically heals the suffering of our children. We have to think about ourselves as healers. Okay? Now, what you cannot control, right, if you ask any biologist about ecosystems, what they'll tell you is that there are meta-ecosystems and there are micro-ecosystems. Now, if your classroom is a micro-ecosystem, the meta-ecosystem is everything that happens in the hallway, that happens in front of the school, that happens on the block, that happens at home, that happens in the broader state, that happens in the broader nation, that happens in the broader society. Okay? When you figure out how to control all that, call me up. Okay? I got a job for you. Until then, right, then focus on what you can control. This is an important lesson for teachers, is being able to identify the conditions that you can control and being okay with not being able to control the things that you can't. Well, what you can control is your classroom. You can control that micro-ecosystem. What you can't control is the toxins that your babies experience before they come in. But what you must understand as a micro-ecosystem teacher is that those toxins are going to cross your threshold. If you work in a community where kids see murder, where kids are experiencing all those forms of suffering, it is going to come into your class, as inconvenient as that may be for you. It is a fact. There's no way around it. So the real question then is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to be that teacher that becomes a healer, that knows that kids are coming in having experienced multiple forms of social trauma, and you're going to become an expert healer? Or not. In which case, you will exclude them. And this brings us, I'm going to jump past Camera Jones' work and I'll come back to her. This brings us to my colleague Wayne Yang, who's at the University of California, San Diego. And he plays with Foucault's idea of discipline and punish. Right? And he calls punishment an exclusionary activity. Right? So when we punish kids, we exclude them and we add to the social toxins in their life. Not healing. Exacerbating the trauma. But you can also think about discipline, which oftentimes gets conflated. Right? So in many schools, discipline and punishment act as synonyms. And they're not. Okay? Discipline is rigorous training for inclusion. Punishment is exclusion. Now, if you think about this in the concept of your micro-ecosystem, you've got this, what in your mind is this beautiful garden that you're building. Right? You got 30 kids, and it's just, everybody's growing so well, and it's a little water here, a little fertilizer here, a little sunshine here, right? And everybody's coming up. But you got this one kid. You know that kid? Yeah, that was me. Okay? I was that kid. And I knew my teachers thought that about me, that I was a weed, that I didn't quite belong. You see, I was the rose growing in concrete, and roses don't grow in concrete. So I was a little bit out of place. Weren't really sure. What do you do with the rose that goes in concrete? Do you water it? Do you pluck it? What do you do with that? Right? And you see that child as a weed because they don't quite fit the... And what do we do with weeds in gardens? We exclude them. Okay? And what Wayne says is there are no weeds. Every child that comes to your class is indigenous to your ecosystem. And so your job is to find the ways in which that form of life can contribute to making your ecosystem more healthy. But what is also important, if indeed he's right, which obviously I believe he is, if you pull a weed, what you think is a weed, that is not a weed, but is in fact an indigenous part of that micro-ecosystem, if you pull it and remove it, what happens to the ecosystem? It gets out of balance. And then what happens to the rest of those beautiful flowers you've got in your ecosystem? They start to change. Okay? And this is a severely underestimated impact in teachers' classrooms. That kids see and kids evaluate us, not on how we treat them. but how we treat others. And that might be the first time you've interacted with that knucklehead. Okay? But that knucklehead has been in class with those kids since first grade. And every teacher that's come along has thrown that kid out. Every teacher that's come along has said, get out of here, you're not, whatever. But what if you're the teacher who doesn't? What if you're the teacher who refuses to go there? What do kids start to believe about you? That you can be trusted differently. That you might indeed actually be able to match your rhetoric with a reality. Okay? That's what it means to have an ecosystem, is to cultivate all of the plants, all of the young people inside of your classroom. Now, Cameron Jones tells a story in medical sociology. She's at the University of, or Columbia University. She tells a gardener's tale. And you can look this story up in a piece that she wrote in a medical, Journal of Medical Sociology, I think. And what the tale she tells is this. She tells the story of this house that her and her husband bought. And when they bought the house, they came up on the stoop and they saw a flower box right at the edge of the stoop, right underneath the window. And in the flower box, there was a partition. And in one half of the flower box, there was nothing. It was completely empty. In the other half of the flower box, there was some old soil. And so her and her husband said to themselves, well, this is the first thing that people are going to see, so let's really liven that up. Okay? So that every time people come to our house, they have this, right, this initial experience. So they go to the local garden store and they buy a bunch of soil and they buy a packet of flower seeds. They come back and they empty the soil into the empty half of the partition. And then they split the seed pack evenly and they throw some in the new soil and they throw some in the old soil and they mix it in and then they water it and they pay attention to it. And then over time, what she notices is that the seeds in the new soil are growing bright and strong, and all of the seeds that they planted there are reaching about the same kind of maximum height. And then in the other soil, the old soil, the stuff that they didn't really touch, the seeds aren't growing as well. Some of them don't grow at all. Some grow only to about middling height. And a few grow up to look like the seeds in the other side. Now, of course, the moral of this story is that the soil that we provide for our seeds to grow in matters most for how they grow. And we can't control all of those external factors, but we can control the soil that we lay down in our classrooms. And what we know about great teaching is that great teachers are audacious enough to provide new, fertile soil every day for young people to grow, in spite of the concrete that they're experiencing outside of our classrooms. And this is what we call the painful path. There's a cost for this journey. Right? So I don't want anybody to romanticize what this actually looks like. But young people are wondering and looking to us first if we will go down the painful path. And if indeed we are willing to go down the painful path, only then will they follow us there. But here's the rub. Many times I have gone down that painful path and I have been bringing a child with me. And they're right alongside me and then all of a sudden you stop and you realize they're not there anymore. And you look back and they've gone all the way back. All that ground they covered, they've lost it. Right? And you're frustrated. I mean, you're mad as hell. Are you kidding me? All those lunches, all those rides, all that after-school tutoring, and you're in a fight? You're locked up because you robbed a store? For real? The question at that moment is not about whether or not we can have an impact on that kid's life still. It's whether or not we will find the courage to go back down that path. Because it is so damn frustrating. Because I already walked this damn path. And can we walk all the way back to that child, meet them where they are, and start again? That's the painful path. Because it's never easy, and it never mets out the way we want it. Right? And we got to learn to love that about kids. And when we can learn to love that about kids, we can remain audaciously hopeful. Now I'll end with an example from one of the best educators that I've ever had the privilege of being taught by. That's Maya Angelou. And if you've read her books, if you've heard her speak, if you've ever interacted with her, right, then you know what I'm talking about. Phenomenal educator. But not one that we often look to for pedagogical practice. Next to her, I have a book by one of my colleagues that I recommend to every teacher in this room. It's called Black Youth Rising. And in it, Brother Jenwright talks about this concept of healing, specifically of this concept of radical healing. And what he says needs to happen, he's referencing specifically about black youth, but what he's saying is that what needs to happen is a form of radical healing. And educators need to see themselves first as radical healers. Then the content will begin to take care of itself with the babies. Because once you're a healer of trauma, kids will continue to go down that path with you on these other things that we know we want them to do. Read, write, do math, all those other things. But not until. Okay? And as Herb Cole said once, that kids don't care what you know. Anybody complete that? Right, till they know that you care. Right? And when kids are coming to you with trauma, and you're a healer, they know you care. And then they care what you know. And this is precisely the lesson that Maya has taught me over and over and over with her work. So I'll end with an interview that she did with Dave Chappelle. Okay. And this interview blew me away because it's precisely the kind of pedagogy that I think we're talking about trying to achieve in our schools. So I'll let her speak for herself.
John Singleton was doing his movie, Poetic Justice, and he asked, would I come out to Los Angeles and do a cameo? I walked out of my trailer that morning, and there was one young man cursing like you could see the blue come out of his mouth. Ooh. And then he and another fellow, they were at each other's throats. They had each other's clothes. So I went up to one young man, and I said, excuse me, may I speak to you? He said, I wouldn't give. I said, I understand that. But may I speak to you for a minute? He said, if these moves, I said, I've heard that before. But do you know how important you are? Do you know that our people slept, lay spoon fashion in the filthy hatches of slave ships, in their own and in each other's excrement and urine and menstrual flow, so that you could live 200 years later? Do you know that? Do you know that our people stood on auction blocks so that you could live? I said, no, I just wonder, when's the last time anyone told you how important you are? And he started the tears started to come out. I had no Kleenex or anything, so I just wiped his face with my hands and talked to him. And Miss Janet Jackson came. She said, Angelo, I don't believe you actually talked to Tupac Shakur. So I didn't know Tupac Shakur. I didn't know Six Pack. I had never heard the name. Because in my life and my age group, you understand, I didn't know that. Tupac's mother wrote me a letter. She said her son had called her right after I had spoken to him. And she wanted to thank me. She said, you may have saved his life. And I thank you, Dr. Angelo.
In that one story, she painted a more human picture of him than the entire media did during his career, you know. People were afraid of Tupac. The media made him like he was this scary thing. And she talked about him like he was a young man in a confusing and difficult situation. And that's kind of what I like about Dr. Angelo. Because I know I'm not perfect and whatever, but it's something that she can look at me and she she can kind of put the picture together. She knows I'm just a dude trying to figure it out.
Each of us has a chance to be somebody. And it's my delight that you would ask for me so that I could have the pleasure, the joy, the thrill of talking to you so that I can be somebody.
So two things I want to point out about what she says there. The first is a key pedagogical moment that she has with Tupac. So she comes out of the trailer, right? Pac's ready to get in a fight. She intervenes. And, I mean, first of all, how important is that somebody's Maya's age is willing to step into this conflict between two young brothers that are in their 20s fearlessly? Right? How is she able to do that? Because she sees her two sons. So there's no question that she must intervene because her two sons are about to fight. So she intervenes, risking her health. Doesn't matter. What good is my health if I'm going to turn away from this? And then how many more things will I turn away from? So she inserts herself. And then what's Pac's response? Thank you. Right? No. Pac's response is exactly the response we get from our kids. Resistance. Get off me. And what's she do? Come again. What does he do? Resist. What does she do? Come again. Come again. Relentless. Why? Because you're my son. Why? Do you know how important you are? Why? Because I love you. Unconditionally. That's what Pac talked about in his work. Unconditional love. So that's an important pedagogical lesson. That kids don't always respond the first time or the second time or the third time. You have to be relentless. The second thing I wanted to point out was how she ends. Everybody catch what she said at the end? Thank you for selecting me so I could be somebody. That she's clear about the fact that her humanity is based on her relationship with other people. Period. Right? Particularly people that she has a responsibility to mentor, but also to learn from. Tupac said, I might not change the world, but I do believe that I'll spark the mind that does. I don't believe I'll change the world as a teacher. I don't believe I'll change the world as a researcher. I don't believe I'll change the world as an academic, but I do believe that my students will. I do believe every day when I stand in front of those 31 ninth graders that I might very well be looking at the person who moves us towards a better society. That's how important our gig is. It's life and death. Because somebody in this room, some teacher in this nation, has the people in front of them that will fundamentally change this world. And so if we screw it up, if we get it wrong, and how many times do we have to get it wrong? Just once. If we mess that up, it's life and death. Right? That's how serious our gig is. And that's why I started looking at the medical research, because I've been arguing that for years, that what we do in the classroom can kill kids or it can create a healthy life for them. So if we get it wrong, we might very well be killing the kids we teach. Right? That's how serious our gig is. And now the medical research is beginning to back that up. That school, as Arne Duncan said, may indeed be the single place where we have the most possibility to fundamentally impact the lives of young people who have very little else in terms of their lives that offer them hope on a day-to-day basis. And right now, we're not delivering very well. But in spite of us, kids are growing in the concrete. Every day, every city, there are young people that are growing in the concrete. And the problem is, with this paradigm, is that when we see the concrete and we see the kid, the most common narrative, this is what happened with me, is they saw me and they said, oh, you're a rose in the concrete. You don't belong here. Roses don't grow on concrete. So what do we do with the rose that's growing out of their place in the concrete? We pluck it. And what do we do with it after we pluck it? We take it to the Rose Garden. We take it to Harvard. We take it to Berkeley. That's where I went. It ain't no Harvard, but, you know, we're trying. And we say, this is where you belong because you're a rose. And roses belong in the Rose Garden. And as the rose that got plucked from the concrete and went to the Rose Garden, I can tell you that as soon as I got there, I knew I was a rose of a different color. And I'm like, is this my Rose Garden? Right? And so it's not about identifying the roses and plucking them and getting them to the... But what we teach our young people is that you must be Joaquin Murrieta. You must be the Robin Hood. Your job is to be plucked out of the concrete and go to the Rose Garden and to steal. To rob these institutions blind of all their resources, all their information, all their knowledge, all their access, and then come back. Okay? And to reinsert yourself in the concrete, the very same crack you left from. You drive back down in that crack and you hold it open so that more water and more nutrients and more sunshine can rain down on the seeds of roses that are in that concrete, the very same concrete you came from. But you see, that's not what happens, is it? Oh no, we get exceptional individuals. And we pluck them out and we bring them to the Rose Garden and say, you are home now, Rose. And we stay there. And what happens behind that is the city comes and it fills in the crack and it covers up that crack. And so the very same kids that were those seeds deeper down in the soil waiting to come up now have to fight the same struggle that rose that cracked through the concrete had. That's why kids love Pac. That's why they love him so much. Is because his narrative is about staying connected to the concrete even if you're a rose. That you don't resent your damaged petals. I wear damaged petals on both my arms. I don't resent those. But so much of what we teach our young people is that they need that those damaged petals are bad. Instead of that's the evidence of their will to reach the sun. Okay? How impactful is Pac? A friend of mine from a major foundation went on a trip just outside of Tibet. And she went to this famous temple. And when she got to the temple, she had just read my Harvard Ed article. Right? She got to the temple, and she saw these three brothers standing there. And this brother was crying. Okay? And this brother put his arm around him and started consoling him. And can you see the shirt he's wearing? Okay? It's Pac. And it's from Machiavelli, his album Machiavelli. Now, for all those Pac scholars in the room, did Machiavelli come out before or after the incident with Maya? Before or after Poetic Justice? Way after, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that Maya's move in that moment, which Pac himself says might have saved his life, allowed Pac to change the world. You never know when that moment's going to present itself to you as a teacher, but it's every moment that it presents itself to you as a teacher. And every moment that you act, you are changing the world. And that's what it means to have critical hope, is to believe that in each of those moments you are fundamentally impacting kids' lives in a way that gives them hope. And I'll end with Malcolm and a debate that is rarely aired because it doesn't quite fit with his black nationalist image, okay, that is often used as a reason why we shouldn't use Malcolm to think about the direction we should head with our pedagogy. And I believe that this is the question that we face as teachers and as educators and researchers, whether to be or not to be the agents of critical hope in our kids' lives?
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Now, as I step off, I want to pass it to a brother from Washington, D.C., who is a high school teacher that read this piece and has also been deeply influenced by Pot. And he contacted me and shared the ways in which he has used it with his students. And so I asked if he would be willing to close my talk by sharing with you the ways in which a teacher took these ideas and made them manifest in front of a group of young people in Washington, D.C. that most people have decided aren't worth our time and effort. So I end by passing it to my brother, who will come up here and leave us with an exceptional level of energy and commitment that I think we all need to model as we go out and work with the youth in our communities. Brother?
Nope. Okay, you can hear me now. So, as Dr. Andrade said, I teach in Washington, D.C., Southeast Washington, D.C., the only high school for emotionally disturbed students. And before I entered the classroom, I committed myself that I would heal. And it's funny that we come across the same strands with one another, but I committed myself to heal because I knew that beyond the academic measures, that person needed more. So I promised myself that I would do the academic responsibilities and some others. So in my micro ecosystem, I tapped into what mattered. I saw my children, I saw myself, I saw my siblings. Understanding that the age range of students with these disabilities, particularly sometimes the high school level, can go up to 19, 20. That's my peer, that's my brother, that's my contemporary. So I saw myself, I saw a child, and I wanted to reach them in a way, so I tapped into the rhythm of the rhyme and dissected what we know to be theory and other practices. And I call this one Roses. Through my sociological lens, I study the role of collective efficacy and its role on the black male. However, it wasn't until I submerged myself within the classroom that I realized that beyond the black male, there's another struggling individual, and that was a black female. You see, in my observation, she was like a rose, delicate yet beautiful. And we all know that it takes a considerable amount of effort to raise a rose to its fullest potential, but I'm sure that you and me can get the job done. Let me tell you about a rose that I know. Hey, look at Chrissy, man, she only 9. But what she brought up in the hood, it's like the sun don't shine. It's like the grass ain't green and the trees don't grow. She's searching to be something other than video material. Fighting hard to follow her dreams, but being different in the hood ain't as easy as what it seems. When the struggle's tough like denim and welfare is in the jeans. She's the baby of a baby who had her at 15, so what this mean? Is she gonna make it or will she fall? Her success rests on the shoulders of us all. So next time you see her, just let the girl know she can make it out the concrete jungle. How can she become something that she ain't seen before? And why would she sow her seed in something she can't see grow? When all she sees is the violence and corrupted people. So let her be all she can be. Don't treat her unequal. Rush them. Chrissy just hit 15. Got big dreams, but reality ain't sweet like 16. Good thing she got a mind of her own, not influenced by the students who remind her of clones. High school dropouts and juvenile criminals. She remains focused while society is cynical. Busting good grades, addicted to the honor roll, arguing with mom, trying to picture while her father rolled. A long time ago, Papa couldn't vominos. Everything fell at once, like standing dominoes. But Shorty didn't let that affect her. Her life is like a movie, and she's the director. Saying no to drugs, avoiding teen pregnancy. Chrissy got a tendency to succeed tremendously. So watch her as she grinds for her goals, blooming as the rose on the side of the road. How can she become something that she ain't seen before? And why would she sow her seeds in something she can't see grow? When all she sees is the violence and corrupted people. So let her be all she can be. Don't treat her unequal. Because what's buried beneath her surface has its purpose, so nobody can tell her that she's worthless. When look into her eyes, and I can tell you that the hurt is rooted in the pain of generational curses and conditions less than perfect. She works with what she's given, taking nothing for granted. Success is in her vision. Destiny is to have it. I am sure she can make it. She is the rose that blooms from the crack in the pavement. Still water run deep. Don't you take her kindness as a sign. She is weak, for the meek shall inherit the earth. Nobody treat poor people like dirt. Only Jah determine their worth. Still water run deep. Don't you take her kindness as a sign. She is weak, for the meek shall inherit the earth. Nobody treat poor people like dirt. Only Jah determine their worth. 'Cause she's a rose. That's a rose upon the side of the road. Yeah, yeah. She's a rose. That's a rose upon the side of the road. Yeah, yeah. She's a rose that spring up from the crack in the ground. Yeah, yeah. 'Cause they are the roses that arose on the side of the road. Thank you.